Salutations! Dave of the band System Degenerate here, giving you another ST lesson. Gonna be another one which is me sat in front of a chair, no, in front of a camera on a chair. Good start, isn't it? I'm going to be talking to you this time about gigs. This is going to be aimed mainly at people who are new to the whole thing, I suppose, because if you're an experienced gigger, you've probably already developed your own methods and your own ways of doing this. But generally, one of the things that is hardest to do when you're a band that's just starting out is to get your first gig. Because a lot of venues, they like bands that are going to pull in crowds, and if they're struggling financially particularly, then they're not really going to want to take on a new starter. So how can you do it? Well, there are ways. First off, you need to do research on your venues. There are certain venues on there, well, there's not so much now, but there was at least when I started, and I was lucky for this, that will basically put on any band that they don't think is full of douchebags. And that was kind of the place where my first gig was not there anymore, unfortunately, but it was a venue called The Junction, and the guy that owned it was awesome fella, awesome guy, and he basically just used to put on any band that didn't have an ego and weren't really obnoxious people. And although I later developed an ego and I felt various obnoxious things, at the time I think I was more or less green enough that he let it slide. So, I mean, that goes on another thing really. You've got to be polite in the way that you do this, and you've got to be polite in the way that you handle people, and you can't go into a venue thinking that you're better than everyone else and that you've got a right to something because you're in a band. If it's your first gig and you're gigging with other bands that have been doing this longer than you and more experienced, you have to know your place. It's not to say that you're any worse than they are, but you have to understand that these people are more experienced than you, and they will know more about these things than you do, and you can't just go on straight ahead and start assuming certain things. Also, if it's your first gig, try not to complain too much. You know, they might have a small venue, a small stage, maybe not a lot of people turned out. It's your first gig. You know, you probably don't want a lot of people there to see you anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's something you've just got to go in there without an ego. You just got to remember that this is your starting point. You know, in terms of actually getting it, often it's just a case of asking. I mean, if you've done your research on that venue and you realise that they're the kind of place that will put you on, then you ask them. If there doesn't seem to be anywhere in your area that will do that, then you find other bands. And you know, there's always a way of contacting other bands, you know, as long as you're not talking to like really famous signed people, but local acts that can get a good crowd in. And you say, do you have any gigs coming up? Do you need any support slots? Because often when a promoter can't be bothered to do their job properly, they will just rely on bands to do that. Of course, when they do that a week before the gig, it's probably worth pulling out of that gig, but that's just personal experience talking, and I won't go into that details because frankly the person in question infuriated me, and I don't want to break off into a rant when I only have a few minutes to make this video. Anyway, now once you've actually gotten your gig, you know, you have to do a few things. One is to make sure you are prepared. Now, I did a gig a couple years ago with a band, and it was their first ever gig. And they were nice enough guys, and they turned up, and they didn't have any amplifiers. And the headline band didn't want to lend them their amplifiers, and we had to lend them ours. Now, I didn't mind doing that myself, but at the end of the day, they made no attempt to contact any of us to say, can we borrow your equipment? They just showed up and assumed that there would be equipment there. Never assume anything. You have to be completely self-sufficient. You may not always have to be, but you have to be ready to be. So you may not always have to bring your own amplifiers and things like that, but you have to have them. And if you don't want to bring them, you have to message the other bands and you have to say, are we using your amplifiers? Is it okay if we do it? And you have to be polite and you have to really suck up to people if you want to use their kit. And you do not abuse their kit. I know the first gig that I ever did, the headline band, awesome guys, you know, made great friends with them, met some great people. The band that were on directly after us were borrowing an amplifier off the headline band that they nearly wrecked. And needless to say, the headline band, which were two very large Welsh blokes, one very large English bloke, were getting ready to drag this guy outside. So Yeah, you want to make sure that you've got everything that you need, because it's better to have it, not need it, need not have it. And I don't just mean in terms of amplifiers in your instruments, I mean in terms of power cables, adapters, leads, all that kind of stuff. Even DI boxes, I always carry DI boxes with me. You know, you need everything that you would need to do a gig, bar the actual PA. If the place hasn't got a PA, don't even bother playing there. The only other thing as well is when you actually get up there and you have to start performing. Now this is obviously the most important thing of doing a gig, is your performance. And it's also the most nerve-wracking. And to this day I get nervous before I go on stage. It could happen a few minutes before I go on, or it could happen half an hour before I go on and go away and I'll be fine again for the rest of the night or whatever. But it happens, and it is true that it goes away once you actually get on stage. It does not go away on your first couple gigs. First couple gigs you do, you will still be nervous while you're on stage. And that is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The only thing you have to remember is that you are there to do a performance. You're not there to play the songs. People will forgive you if you make mistakes in the songs. If you hit wrong notes, maybe you mess up a riff or whatever, as long as you don't stop, you carry on playing, so it's not noticeable, because they don't know the songs. You know, they're not going to suddenly turn around and think, oh, he's played that wrong because, you know, he played it differently on the album. They don't know it. They've just come to see you play. This is a new experience for them. So if you make mistakes, that's fine. What is not fine is not putting on the show. You can't just go up there and look at your hands and stand in the same place. Now the first gig I did, I was really nervous. And I got so nervous that I thought if I moved around or anything, I would just look ridiculous. So what I ended up doing was just standing there and just putting on a really bad show. And then after that I kind of realised that if it felt embarrassing, it was the right thing to do, because it actually isn't embarrassing at all. You're putting on a good show when you're moving around, and although you feel ridiculous, it's more ridiculous to just stand there and do nothing, and that's what people are going to notice. They're going to notice that you're standing there doing nothing. So move around, get into it, enjoy yourself. Doesn't matter if you hit a wrong note, it matters if you're not putting on a performance. You are there for a show. You're not just there to play songs. So, I mean, this is a few little tips and hints that hopefully will help out. And yeah, see you in next week's lesson. Dave out.